Welcome back to the White Cloud Mystic Podcast. I'm Nicole, your host, and this is episode 13. And in this episode, I go over my personal journey. I talk about kind of where I started and why I started seeking, and I go through the journey of it, all the different places: hypnotherapy, astrology, channeling, magic, nature spirits, everything. Everywhere I've been is kind of talked about here. And the driving question behind all my seeking of what's my purpose? Every seeker's journey is unique to them, and this is mine. Let's begin. What is my life purpose? What am I supposed to do here in this life? What's the point? These questions are probably very familiar to you, as I'm sure you have wondered them yourself. And maybe they are currently burning in your heart. This type of question has the ability to drive us to explore and discover more about ourselves. And it also has the ability to make us question and feel less confident about who we are right now and what we're doing. It can ignite us and it can disempower us all at the same time. This is a burning question, and it drives probably the majority of spiritual seekers. When I first began trying to answer this question for myself, I approached it from the angle of understanding my personality better. That maybe if I knew who I was from a personality level, then I could figure out what the best purpose would be for my time here. So that's where I started. I started looking into Myers-Briggs and really studied that type of personality typing very, very in depth. I was so familiar with that material that every person I met, I was basically sizing them up for what personality type I believed them to be of those 4 letters of the Myers-Briggs. And I was usually actually pretty accurate. I would ask people or super sleuth that information from them. And it wasn't long after Myers-Briggs that I discovered astrology and started becoming very obsessed with understanding my birth chart. And the birth chart of astrology can give you a really amazing perspective over your experience. And I was deep in study of astrology for many years. And it was from a personal angle, so always from this angle of how do I understand myself better so I can perform in the world, so I can feel fulfilled? How can I know myself so I can choose the vocation, choose the relationships, choose my hobbies based on my personality so I would feel fulfilled, like I have purpose? That was my angle of my approach for many years. That was all fine and good, and I felt that at the time I had a pretty good grasp on myself and my personality, even though astrology itself is a never-ending, deeper and deeper type of study. And while I enjoyed understanding myself at that level, and I helped a lot of people in my astrology phase, I read quite a few birth charts and helped people to see themselves in a new light and to validate some of their experiences. And it was a helpful step for them, I'm sure. But I actually felt just disconnected with the content. There was just something about it where I couldn't really validate it within myself. It just felt a little bit separated from me, from my actual experience. I could read about it and I could, with my mind, and I could know it with my mind, but there was just this bit of disconnect. I couldn't live it. I could only analyze it. Astrology is a tool of analysis. And so while it kept my mind busy for quite a few years, it never really quenched that thirst. And yes, astrology does have planets and positions and nodes that help direct the reader to have a better understanding of their life purpose. You can read that in a chart and have that interpreted for you, but it is still this vague answer. It's only going to be categories and adjectives. You can't necessarily experience it. It's all analysis. And so for me, that wasn't quite enough. At this time is when I began reading the work of Dr. Michael Newton, the man who developed the technique of past life regression hypnosis that led into exploring the life between lives in the spirit state. And you can find his books, Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, and a few others, all on their website, and they're widely available on Amazon and bookstores. And this was another way that I believed that gaining that understanding of purpose in life could be explained. Because in his work, the individual goes to the point where they are choosing their life ahead. So basically, the soul is getting ready to jump into like your current body, my current body, and it has a plan for the life. It has an idea of what it would like to achieve. And at the time, I just thought that was so amazing. However, I was too young to have a Life Between Lives session. I was in my early 20s when I was reading that content and really absorbing it quite a bit. And what Dr. Michael Newton found in his case studies was that individuals weren't really given very much information until after they were in their early 30s, usually, is when their spirit guides would kind of divulge more information, which astrologically, it would be after their Saturn return, which if you're unfamiliar with the Saturn return, it is this time period in everybody's life in the age range of about 27, 28 to 31, 32. It's this span of time, about 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years, where the big life shifts happen, kind of the make or break themes approach your life and really shape and redirect you into kind of who you are being in this life. And so when I was working originally with the, we'll call it Life Between Lives, LBL material, I was too young. I knew that if I had had that session, my guides weren't going to give me much. So I was probably 23, 24, and I was so frustrated that I would have to wait. That's when I began to explore past life regressions because that was something I could do. And I became a hypnotherapist. I took a course in hypnotherapy and worked with some people at that time, exploring past lives with others. And while that was interesting and fun, it really never gave me clarity to the degree that I was hoping for my current life. And so I had to keep seeking, like, what is my purpose? It was around that time that I became married and had a baby as well. I had my son when I was 27, and right at the beginning, he was born while Saturn went right into my Saturn return. He was like the Saturn return baby. So during that time, I began to explore meditation and like Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, and Osho. I was consuming lots of Osho, and I really enjoyed his perspective. And that helped me to kind of break through some of my understandings of structured religion and a new perspective of beingness. Both of those teachers, and they are starkly different, but they can help reach that same point. And there were moments where I would come into these very profound states. While I was meditating during Osho content, I would almost have visions. And I think I was working with both Osho, his energy and his perspective. And then I think I moved a little bit more into Eckhart Tolle and working on my beingness and living in flow. And with his energy and recommendations, I was able to center and easily float through my days and experiences, and I felt a lot less discord in my life with the Eckhart Tolle perspective and his influence. I believe it was during this time, while I was studying Osho and Eckhart Tolle, is when I created my first magical-based guided meditations on YouTube. And I created just 5 of a 6-part series. It took me a whole year to finish that series because my personal exploration was so great during that time. But it was about that time that I created those first ones, and I felt so excited about the very first one. I felt like, this is it. This is my purpose. Creating these spaces for people to grow and change and experience it from a deeply subconscious way where they can just like experience shifts and then live their lives kind of changed. And so I was really, really excited about that. Like, I still have that very vivid memory of how excited I was and telling my husband about it and like, this is it. This is my purpose. And honestly, had I just stopped and focused on that and developed it at that time, it would have been really wise. But I was so driven and still in that seeking, almost like an addiction, that I kept going. And somehow I got into listening to, there's a woman, she's a channeler, and she's on YouTube. Pamela Arwin, I think is her name. And I began listening to her work and her content. So she would receive messages from beings out of body, all sorts of different levels, and would speak what they were saying. And that was my very first time with that type of content. And I really was interested. I was hesitant to believe it. And I watched probably all of her content that she had at the time. And some of her messages were resonating at such a high vibration that I knew that it was something good. Like there were definitely these moments where what she was sitting in, her energy that she was sitting in, was really powerful. And that drew me into, okay, well, how does one channel and how can we connect with our higher guides so we can understand our purpose more? And that spun off that seeking process for me. I then discovered the material of the Law of One, the raw material, and this was amazing work that was channeled work that was done in the 80s by a group that you'd have to like research it, but the level of information that they were able to receive through their channeler was just like beyond what someone could kind of like come up with or create or fabricate. And they had, I think, over 100 and probably maybe about 120 sessions of questions and answers of just everything from understanding your chakras to other dimensions to how to eat in your physical body, just like an amazing wealth of information. And I I absorbed all of it. I listened to it all in a short period of time. And during it, I was breaking my paradigms and allowing them to just like blow open basically everything that I ever held as true. I was okay with just destroying it and recreating something new in pursuit of what is true. Also, I could discover what is true so I know what to fit my purpose as. I want to fit in my purpose. If I know the big picture, then I can form my purpose to match that big picture and not be a waste of time. I then found the work of Dolores Cannon. She has many books and cases and experiences with a different type of hypnotherapy, and it's called quantum healing hypnotherapy. You'll hear it as QHHT. And her method was a little bit different than the past life regression or the very long, slow life between lives technique, where it was very quick in theory to get you to this space of higher consciousness or, deep into your subconscious. It was supposed to help bypass that so you could kind of quickly unlock yourself and go to other lives, other experiences, that type of work. And this is like deep into the metaphysics community, is where I was exploring at the time. Again, all like, what's my purpose? So I consumed all of that information. I listened to, I didn't read all of her books, but I listened to quite a bit of information that was available online. All I could really do at the time, because I had a young son, was listen to a lot of audio material. And I found her information very interesting because in a way it correlated to Dr. Michael Newton's work, but it seemed like she was able to get access to information that he wasn't able to get. And so that had its appeal. And during the same time period, I was meditating and exploring. I was also beginning to work with crystals and sensing energy. Just all these things this was my awakening process, basically. And I was able to sign up to do a QHHT session. And I went into it, you're supposed to have a list of questions before you go into your QHHT session. And I had 3 months to wait before my session. And so I was just trying to figure out what are the best questions, what will solve all my exploration needs in this one session. And so I started writing my questions to try to figure them out, which ones would be good. And very quickly I started to realize that when I would write a question, a burning question that I really wanted to know, the world around me started to answer that question. This is when my relationship with interacting with the universe really began. I would write a question and then, maybe not right away, but within a few days, a book would just kind of like show up in my feed or at the library, or something would come to kind of answer that question or fulfill that need. And so I started to realize that there were these synchronicities that were answering things for me. So my questions started to get more and more specific. And I was learning a lot because I was questioning a lot and receiving the answers all over the place. Very soon, at some point, as I was writing a question, I had this urge to just write the answer. And I actually was able to go into a space where I could channel an answer for myself. I was tapping into either my subconscious to answer it, my higher self. I wasn't sure. But it was definitely an answer that I wasn't doing from my thinking mind. And this was a whole new ballpark for me. And I began doing this nonstop. I would ask a question and I would go into this space. It's almost that divination space, that magical space, the quiet space, and write the answer to myself. And while I was doing this, I was getting so much encouragement from whatever energy I was writing and interesting perspectives. And I felt really excited about having this ability to answer questions. And soon the writing wasn't fast enough. I was actually then able to just channel. I could ask a question, go into a space, and channel. And in the beginning, I was connecting with a very pure, higher energy that I believed to be my higher self. And I was able to have these beautiful, encouraging statements just flow out of me, and it was amazing. More time passed, and my questions were getting more and more specific, and they were getting more direct toward my experience or like the experience of others, more, I guess, almost like predictions. I was going for like predictions. And what I learned later and what I'll explain later is that there are ways of using a channeling gift that are in service of others, and there are ways of using a channeling gift that are purely in service of self. And doing predictions and where you're trying to get the date of something, or like how much money is this going to be, or something very specific, the energy behind that is kind of a lower base energy, and it creates kind of this downward spiral, and it can corrupt whoever you're connecting with outside of your as your channeled energy. If you're asking a question from a very baser energy, kind of a negative energy, the response is probably going to come from that kind of, it's going to match you. And so I was in that kind of downward spiral. I was getting a lot of negative questions, a lot of negative answers. But at the time, I didn't know. I was simply just, I need to understand everything there is to know and asking everything. And I didn't care who I was connecting with outside of my body. I didn't care. I just wanted to know more. And so I had all of that going on right before my QHHT session, the actual session, which was what I was preparing for to have these questions. And I went into that session pretty cocky. I felt like, oh, I already have a big grasp. And I felt like, oh, I probably have something to show this lady. And I went to that same space in that session. I did have some visions that were unique and it was a little bit different than a past life regression. It wasn't as clear because the induction, the process of like calming your mind and getting out of your mind, was really quick and abrupt, and I don't know. It wasn't as amazing as I thought it would be. And I felt like I was kind of performing, that I was there to perform and not actually grow. So that experience wasn't as positive as I had originally hoped it would be. After that, I began to connect with that community, and I was channeling who I believed were some individuals who had passed on. And so I was doing that kind of work. And I had an opportunity to if I had wanted to, where I was gaining kind of followers and people were listening to the things that I was saying. And I could have gained power. I could have created like a career doing that. I could have made money. I could have had people looking to me for answers. And it just felt so against my inner being. And I got really disturbed by it. And so I shut it all off. I shut off channeling. I closed down energy. I closed down everything. It's just like, no, that is not where I would like to go. And so I stopped everything. And I went quiet in my spiritual growth, in my spiritual seeking for probably 6 months. Very slowly after that, I began to come out and reconnect with nature and the goodness in nature. And I began my path into basically magic. I started to study the tarot and I started to connect with trees and plants, and I started to study druidry and kind of like the witchcraft because of the earthiness of it. Their history is, they're tied to the earth. I started to study paganism and I guess the roots of the ancestors. I was drawn to just kind of explore spirituality from that angle. Like, okay, so what did my ancestors really do? And how can I kind of, like, what was their path? I explored far beyond, like, even during that time, I had so many experiences. I just can't even begin to explain all of them. I explored far and beyond, and I needed to come back to earth. And so exploring the roots of paganism and druidry and magical crafts, and that's where I was able to connect that way. And so connecting with the earth, we moved out into the forest the last year. We moved out. We have 20 acres. We live in a log cabin, and there's like very little around us, in the hopes of having space and being able to, I guess, not be under the influence of anything except of what we choose, was the idea. And while we were out here, I was starting to produce more guided meditations. While I was exploring my inner self, I began doing shadow work and really grew a great respect for what that is and self-acceptance, and started to look at, I guess, what propelled me to seek so hard. And like an addiction, it truly was. And I guess a very like earthy approach, a very earth and water truly approach to myself in magic and understanding the universe and all of that. And I was able to connect with one of my subscribers on YouTube and on Instagram, and the timing was so perfect to feel encouraged about what I was producing on YouTube with the guided meditations, and that the work that I was producing was helping people. I had been receiving lots of comments throughout the years and months of producing things, but I guess it was interacting with someone a little bit more one-on-one, back and forth through messaging, and hearing about the synchronicities in their life and the positive growth. It helped me to feel like I had my place, like that purpose was there, the purpose to do the work, the guided meditations and that type of work. It was there the whole time. And so thanks to that encouragement, I started producing more. I started producing closer to every 2 weeks, and then moved into almost a weekly rhythm of producing guided meditations. And I was able to realize that all of the seeking, the incredible amount of seeking that I've kind of touched on here, has a place, it has a purpose, it has helpfulness to share in guided meditations and ultimately here in the podcast. But because of the far range and the stretching and growing that I did, potentially that enriches my content and the gifts that I can give here in this space, as well as just kind of really rounding out my personal beingness. All of that was my path to becoming more centered in myself, able to hold my own presence longer, and all of that. And so, all of that has purpose. Almost ironically, though, the universe has this sense of humor. I actually have a Life Between Lives session, my first session, where I will get to receive it this coming weekend, this Friday. And it's almost like, it feels like now at this point in my growth and my discovery, that it's like the capstone course for me as a seeker. Like, this is it. This is the end of the seeking. I feel very settled in my understandings now, and that the answers are always just right within. And I'm approaching this session with vulnerability and openness and acceptance, as well as knowing that it will enrich what I've experienced already. I'm sure it will validate everything that I've experienced, and barring any major epiphany that is just completely new to me, I believe that this session will kind of be that capstone course, the capstone experience where I feel fully able to settle in and really just be within myself and produce creatively for the fun and the joy of it, to allow myself to express myself as the beautifully unique, energetic being that I am, which is always the big mystery, the big spoiler alert here. Like, the purpose always is, it's so simple. It is to allow yourself to be who you are and to express yourself to the fullest of what you are in what you are. And the process of that is truly stripping away the things that are restricting you from being who you are. And that's the whole purpose. It's stripping away what's not part of you or keeping you from being you, and then coming into this world and expressing yourself and sharing the gifts that are natural to you, and being a part of it, being a part of the community. In a way, this episode is it's like my send-off to the seeker in me, the closing of a major life chapter, and a welcoming of what's to come, which is what's always been there, and that is presence, and allowing that deepening of presence. The guided meditation that will be coming out on my YouTube channel this coming Saturday is going to be one that brings the listener to a very deep state. And I will have you be there for a long time. I'm going to have it be a really long, I'm going for about an hour, really deep, really long, and coming out feeling very centered and rested. Kind of like a deep spa experience is what I'm going for. So you can look forward to that this coming Saturday. If you are listening to this podcast later, you can go ahead and look for that. I will probably call it Deep Relaxation. So you can look for that guided meditation there if you're interested in that. Thank you for listening to me do this spiritual autobiography in the briefest way I could. I mean, we experience these things in our lives and we could go on and on and on about them. So this is like the quick version. I'm sure in future episodes I'll go deeper into any of these experiences based on what I'm talking about, but I think I'll always point back to this episode as far as like my personal growth story and how I found purpose and my time as a seeker. If you have questions about being a seeker or any of these modalities that I've talked about, I am very well versed on all of them. And so I can go specific in a future podcast if you'd like. Thank you all for being here and being a part of a platform that allows me and so many people to express ourselves and work on shining our light. And that is what this space is. Any creative space, it's a chance for people to develop their ability to shine. And I appreciate you all for greeting me with kindness and giving me the opportunity and space to shine. So thank you very much. And you can find me on Patreon. That is linked below. I am on Instagram and I am starting to post there more. I kind of took an Instagram break, but I'm back on Instagram. That is linked below. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.